There's always a lot of talk in the industry about how slow the whole process of buying and selling a house is. And there seems to be a lot of frustration, but nothing much ever seems to happen. And in actual fact, it feels that the process has recently got longer. So my team at Move IQ are part of a trade and industry and indeed government group called the Home Buying and Selling Group, which is committed to enabling and forcing change and really speeding the process up. So today I'm really pleased to be joined by Maria Harris, who chairs the Home Buying and Selling Technology Group. And that is a key role, obviously, in collating all of the data that is necessary in a housing transaction. Maria, thank you, first of all, joining us. Great to see you. How can individual owners of the data, because the data that's involved in a property transaction, it belongs to us. It's our personal data. It's about us. What can we do to drive change?
Well, I guess the first thing is that for customers to kind of understand that why the process is the way it is and the things that are in the way, and then how we unlock it, because you're absolutely right. The process hasn't really changed in decades. If you were designing the journey today that a customer goes on, you wouldn't design it the way it is. This has grown organically over, years and years of processes that actually started being very paper and document driven. And all we've done is made that process a bit more electronic and a little bit faster and a bit more online, but we haven't actually fundamentally changed the journey. And we're not great at telling customers why that is. And the whole process is quite opaque and it's not very transparent about who's doing what and when. I guess the first thing is for customers to actually know that it doesn't have to be this way, and that all of the technology and all of the data that you would use if you were redesigning this process actually do exist today.
It exists.
It exists. All of it's technically possible. The data is there. It's just that we're very reliant now on lots of documents, lots of paper flying about. We don't have a huge amount of trust in the different parts of the industry who need to share that data or share those documents. We make customers provide it multiple times, and you'll know better than anyone when a buyer is going through this process, the number of times they have to provide identity, bank statements, proof of funds. You do it multiple times because we do it on documents and we don't trust. So
it's such a, sorry interrupting, but it's such an emotional process. The whole journey of choosing a house or buying a house and selling a house, it's deeply personal. It's very expensive, and people understand that sometimes it goes awry, and there might be some bumps along the way, and it's not always smooth. I get that, but it is increasingly frustrating that change doesn't seem to happen. And just before we went online, I just had a little think about the numbers of organizations and people over the last 2 years, maybe 3, that I've had these chats with. I've talked to the RICS, I've talked to Land Registry, Code-Jute, Property Mark, various conveyancers, mortgage brokers, lenders, key lenders, and everybody says that they're doing things and yes, we've got to speed this up, but not much seems to happen, or it hasn't yet. Why is that, Maria?
Yeah, I think because if everybody's working on their own individual bit of it, then you can make things better and you can speed bits of it up. But that's not changing the actual underlying fundamental process or the steps that a customer goes through. And let's say you'll know better than anyone. So by the time somebody gets to actually find the property that they want to buy, they've been through a huge amount already, from getting mortgage ready, getting financial advice, knowing how much they can borrow. So by the time they actually find the property and then they're financially committed, emotionally committed, and they've invested a lot of time, and that's where the emotion comes from. And for a customer, they think that's like the end of the hard bit, when actually in the process, that's the process starting, because that's when you then get into conveyancing, title checking, all of the things that currently sit right at the back end of the process. And that's the biggest problem, because that starts way too late. And actually all of that data, everybody needs that data right at the very front of the process. And actually the seller should know all of that before they even list the property for sale, because you should be sharing that information with the buyer and with the estate agent and with the mortgage lender. So the basics, the process is back to front. Everything that you need to know up front, you find out at the end. And that's when we get into the situation now where you think you've bought the house, you're in the kind of final bits, and actually lots of stuff comes out that you didn't know, or the seller didn't know, around problem with the title or problem with access, or that the property is not actually suitable security for the lender. And all of those things just come out way too late in the process. So unless the industry properly redesigns the customer journey, makes it data driven, and pulls all of that data right to the very front, that's the only thing that's going to fundamentally change it.
I completely see what you're saying. We've got it back to front.
And it's always been back to front, always. And we've worked around it, and we suck it up, and we tell customers, this is what it's like. We'll help you through it, and we just stick and plaster over it.
But everyone's had enough.
I think it's time that people should say they've had enough. Customers don't know that there's a better way to do it. And the industry historically haven't been great at collaborating. And we've not generally, and I am being very generalistic, we've not generally designed things from a customer experience perspective. We do it very process driven. We tick our compliance boxes. We do what we need to do in legal terms. We do all the things that we need to within our risk parameters, but we don't design the process based around what the customer experience actually should be.
I get all of that. But what are we going to do about it? But what are the, what are the home buying and selling group encouraging people to do? What can be done?
So the home buying and selling group have been working on this for about 4 years, and what they identified, and this is, it's not a new conversation, is that the data does need to be upfront. And actually, when somebody's viewing a property that's up for sale as part of the listing, all of that data should be made available. And before you enter into the negotiation around asking price and what you're going to pay, you should have access to the right data to make that decision. And so should your mortgage lender, and so should your valuer. And those things need to be checked right up front as well. So having your property pack right at the very beginning before you even list, and having a seller instruct the conveyancer so that all of that data can be properly verified and checked up front. They did some soft testing, we did some beta, we gave it to estate agents and conveyancers and said, right, we want you to try having this property pack. We want you to try pulling all of this. There's a buyer and seller property information pack to fill in. Try doing that all up front. Instruct your title searches, instruct your local searches, and get your conveyancer involved right at the beginning, and tell us what impact it has, which was all great. But what we found was that the people who used it then almost used it like another form and created more documents, which was not the intention. So last summer, the home buying and selling group asked me if I would chair a technology group and get a bunch of very talented people together who are proper data scientists, people who know how to write code, and to come up with a way to make the pack digital and to make it data driven. So we've been working on that since July.
I'm liking the sound of this.
It's been absolutely brilliant. We did a proof of concept, which we demoed to government and industry at the end of March. And we showed that where we can get the data from primary sources, we've created a trust framework to show this is provenance.
Sorry, can I just ask you, primary sources, can you just expand on that a little bit?
So where we can show that the data has come from where the data actually existed in its primary format. So for title deeds, that would be land registry. For your call authority flags, that would be the call authority. For your local searches, that would be your local authority. Where it's performance rating on your energy performance certificate, that comes from the EPC website.
So it's whoever created that piece of data.
Yes. And
so that's the primary source of data. Okay, sorry.
So we work with the primary data sources to say, how do we make that data available in a digital format? And then how do we create a trust framework that shows, if I've collected that data from land registry, I can show you where it came from. I can show you when and how it was obtained, and I can prove that that is the right data. And then the next person who needs to use that can trust that that data is official.
Where are we at if the land registry compile or store or send their data in a different format to the local search or something?
And that has been historically the problem. So all of the data is in lots of different places. Lots of the data today isn't stored in a format that makes it machine readable or makes it easy to access via something like an API. lots of the data isn't actually even stored on digital platforms in the way that you would expect with something like open banking, digital identity, the other things that we just take for granted, Internet of Things, all the stuff that we just access every day that's ubiquitous and just part of our everyday lives. So there's a big push now, and it comes from government itself to say data needs to be open, it needs to be accessible, and that means that those custodians of data actually need to sort out their digital roadmap. Those guys need to make that data available and in the right format for everyone to be able to access.
Okay. Can that happen? Will they do it? I mean, my chats with different people, different players in the industry and consumers and agents and what have you, everybody's pushing in the same direction, it seems. Everybody wants it to be easier. Everybody wants it to be sped up and more efficient and more enjoyable. But unless they're all working together, I can't see that. I can't see that happening. Do you feel, as society, we're able to put enough pressure on government, to put enough pressure on the different stakeholders and data custodians to actually change their businesses?
I think we can, but we need to make some noise about it. Obviously, we had the Competition Market Authority did the similar thing with open banking, and that was how open banking came about, because it wasn't in customers' best interest, the way the data was stored and not shareable, and there's customer detriment. And we can prove in home buying and selling process, there's customer experience issues. 1 in 10 customers are reduced to tears. We know that there's a big time drag, and the average time to get to completion now is something horrific, like 24 weeks, and actually has gotten worse over the last few years. And it was estimated, there was a piece of work done in, I think it was 2017, by the Homeowners Alliance, that they put a value on this, and they think it's costing consumers in the region of £500 million a year in fair transactions. And we know we still get 1 in 4, 1 in 3 transactions that fall through. So the cost to the consumer, the cost to the industry, just the cost to UK bottom line P&L is enormous. And there's lots of kind of intangible things in there as well. Like if you're waiting to move house and it's taking 24 weeks, there's an impact on when you can start a new job, getting your kids into school, buying the furniture you want for your new house, getting the builders in to do work. There's just so many knock-on things. So I think that's the stuff we need to be telling government, like, we need to do something about this. This is a big cost.
Do you think the government would, I mean, if people made enough noise to their MPs and what have you, and the government put enough pressure on the different holders of the data, do you think, I guess what I'm interested in, whose responsibility would it be to create the new format of holding that data?
So it would be each of the individual data holders, and they all need to do it. And this is actually government strategy. So we're pushing against what is already published.
Okay.
So then,
and I'm sorry, I keep interrupting. That's what they did with online banking, wasn't it?
It's exactly right. It's exactly
so
what
it's been done. There is precedent.
There is precedent. So there's precedent for open banking, there's precedent for digital identity, but actually the government published the UK's national data strategy, and that paper was made public on September 2020. And that paper actually outlines that government departments who hold this data have to make it FAIR, and FAIR is an acronym, and I'll explain what that is in a sec, but with the intention that the UK needs to remain world leading in terms of data economy. We've got a really big global position in terms of data and fintech and all the things that hang off that. And it's really, really important to the balance sheet of the country and the jobs it creates and the wealth that it creates and the services that we provide to the rest of the world. But also one of the other missions on that paper was that public should have trust in the use of data, and they should have access to the data that you just said, the data about our own properties. I'm a homeowner. I should have access to the data about my own property, and I should be able to share that with relevant people for the relevant
100%. 100%.
So this is absolutely government driven and has to be, and it's part of their own national data strategy.
Okay. You mentioned FAIR data principles. Could you just tell us what that is?
Yeah, so the national data strategy has a set of principles in there around how data should be stored, how it should be accessible, how it should be created and managed. And the FAIR principles mean that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. All the things that property data isn't right now. So when I was saying that data is all in different places, but it's all in different formats. So it's not findable. You can't send a machine to go and find that data. It's not stored on digital platforms, so it's not accessible. You can't build an API and say, go and get me that data. And because we don't have it as a data-driven process, it's not interoperable. And interoperable just means that systems can share data and transfer it between them. So in the same way, if we were on our digital banking platform and an app right now, and I wanted to ping you some money, I can do that with a fingerprint on my biometrics. I can see the money leave my account and you can see it land in your account because that data is interoperable between our two banking platforms. And that's what we should be doing. And then reusable just means exactly that. I should be able to collect the data for my house. If you want to buy it, you should be able to then use that data. And if you are the new owner of the house, you get to keep that data and share it with the next person.
Oh, it all makes perfect sense when you say it like that. It does sound so simple, but it's very complex. But it's possible. I think that's what I'm taking out of this. It is possible that the system exists. It's been done before in banking.
It has.
I really struggle to see all the different organisations and the holders of the data being that helpful to this. I know they all want to advance the process. I get that. But they're all involved in their different worlds and different businesses. So there's going to need to be an awful lot of government pressure on that to happen. And of course, the government are only going to apply that pressure if they receive the pressure from the consumers. So what I'm taking out of this is it's our data. It's my house, my data. And it's held by different people.
Yeah.
But I should be able to 100%, particularly in this world of GDPR and things, it's my data. I need to access it. Yeah. And I guess, is that the message that we want people to put to their MPs?
Absolutely. And, you know, the government, there was a levelling up white paper that came out just a few weeks ago, which was commissioned by Michael Gove as the new Minister for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And he actually mentions home buying and selling group twice in that white paper on the basis that government need to lean in, they need to support this, they acknowledge that the process isn't great and know it needs to change, but now we need action. So we need consumer pressure absolutely on government and local authorities to crack on and do the digital. But then we also need the industry to play their part. So estate agents, mortgage brokers, lenders, valuers, conveyancers, we've started writing the trust framework. We've been working with that since last July. We've written the technology and the data standards for upfront information. The industry then would need to adopt those. And that's just how you write your JSON schemas and your APIs and make your technology able to speak. And it's things like a data dictionary. So when you send your UPRN and your postcode and your address format, that my machine reads that in the same way that your machine does. And we need the industry to do that too.
Maria, would you say there's any truth in the thought that a complicated system of buying and selling houses actually suits some people involved in that process, because consumers are committing to houses, they're having surveys, they're engaging lawyers, they're brokers, they're filling in forms left, right and centre, and at least a third of those transactions don't come to fruition. So there are, I don't know what the figures are, but hundreds of millions of pounds that are being effectively wasted on this slightly broken process. That's hundreds of millions of pounds consumers are spending, but somebody's getting. So there are businesses that arguably are benefiting from that. Would you say there's any truth in their perhaps resistance to change?
I actually think that's one of the reasons that it's been A, too hard to change, but B, no real desire to change, because ultimately the customer will do whatever they need to do to get their dream house, because it's an emotional purchase. And once you've found that dream home, you will do whatever you need to do to get it. But there is so much waste in the process, and there's so much cost that is hidden and customers don't expect up front, but also that are duplicated. So there's a very poor process where customers are having to provide identity checks or having to pay for things. And then when that property transaction falls through, they don't get reused. So there's a huge amount of personal waste on the buyer and the seller side. And you're absolutely right. There are whole parts of the industry who make money off what is actually a heartbreaking customer experience. But there are also lots of services that people are making money from instructing that consumers just aren't even aware of. So, for example, when you go to get a mortgage now and you speak to your mortgage broker or your advisor, they have to be really transparent about how much they're charging you for that advice, but also how much money the lender is paying them in a fee to place that mortgage with that lender. That's not the same across the rest of the transaction. So you've got people who are instructing searches, instructing conveyancer, instructing valuation, who are charging their own fee on top of that, and consumers just aren't even aware. So there's a huge amount of money in the industry being made from poor customer practice.
I'm glad you agreed with that, because it's felt to me sometimes on the different discussions that I've had with trade bodies and this, that, and the other, that there is great talk about smoothing the process and speeding it up, making it easier. But actually, perhaps that explains why it hasn't happened, because there's not a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, lack of.
So it's the consumer that's got to drive this.
Yeah, it does. The consumer needs to drive it. Industry need to change, but government need to make this happen.
Well, with your help and us at Move IQ, let's make as much noise as we possibly can. When we ask consumers to get involved, contact their MPs, subscribe to Move IQ, support you guys, I guess we also have to recognise that they are involved in that housing transaction for a fairly, well, I was going to say limited, but it might not be so limited, a period of time. And when they get involved in the process, then they realise it's a bit broken, it's a bit annoying, a bit frustrating, time-consuming, a bit expensive. 6 months later, hopefully they've bought their property, and then, oh, thank God, I don't have to deal with that ever again. And then they're at that point, they stop pressing for change, complaining about the process, contacting their MPs. So I guess there's only a limited number of people at any one time really feeling the pain and the expense of the process. We need the whole of society, because we all live somewhere, want to live somewhere different, buy somewhere, we are a society of homeowners, and as a society, our system is almost broken. Yeah, and we need everybody to.
Yeah, and there's over 1 million transactions every year, so that's a lot of people every year to make noise. But as a homeowner, people should have this data anyway. There are lots of things that could happen if we had access to the data about our own homes. And when we talk about getting to carbon neutral and energy efficiency and getting access to better financial products, a huge amount of that is actually tied up in our property. So the more that we can get people to engage with the financial aspect of the homes, but also how to be a good homeowner, how to make that asset really work for you, all of that's possible with the data as well. So once we get past the actual, the bit of the mortgage and the ick bit, somebody described it to me like a bit like having childbirth, that it's horrendous. You get through it, you forget about it, and you don't do it again for a few years. But the actual process, like that, being a homeowner is usually for life. So yeah, the more we can do to get customers using their home data to make their lives, make their financial health better, all of that kind of stuff. So I think all homeowners should be making noise about it.
Hear, hear, so say I. I know what you do is a voluntary role, so I couldn't be more grateful to you and all of your colleagues and people that you work with for doing what you do. It's really important. Let's make it happen. Incredibly grateful. Keep doing what you're doing. We will get there.
We will. I'm determined it's going to happen.